Hello, today's video is going to look at rhyme scheme. I'm going to take a random poem and try and say something significant and meaningful about the rhyme scheme, because I tend to find that rhyme scheme is something of a blind spot for a lot of students. When I'm marking my own students' papers, some of their responses to rhyme schemes depress me. And it's not that these girls are stupid, far from it. It's just, to be honest, it's very hard sometimes to say something significant about the effects of the rhyme scheme. I mean, once you've said, and the poet uses an ABCDA rhyme scheme, you know, where do you go from there? But you smart students know, to get that A star to C, you have to not just identify technique, you have to analyse it too. So just saying it's got an ABCD rhyme scheme isn't going to cut it. This video then will help us address and analyse the effects of rhyme scheme. You can whiz through this slide if you know the exam spec. You've got 30 minutes to write about this, not a lot of time. Thank goodness you're only looking at one poem. And the way I respond to it, which is not the way every teacher responds to it, is to spend 10 minutes analysing that poem in response to the question, of course, 18 minutes writing my response, and just 2 minutes at the end, tooth-combing through my work, winkling out those errors of spelling and punctuation and grammar. Underneath, you can see the assessment objectives, AOs 1, 2 and 3. You need to be commenting intelligently on the theme or idea that is cited or mentioned in the question. You need to support those comments with appropriate evidence. You don't need big, meaty chunks of the poem thrown in as evidence. Keep your quotations appropriate, not massive. And where you can, lock in on key phrases or key words that link to the theme. Of course, this is an English literature exam, so the bread and butter of your response is going to be analysing the effects of language or structure and the effects on the reader. To evaluate simply means pulling out another interpretation for your evidence, or just delving back into that piece of evidence and trying to winkle out another language or structural technique and commenting on that too. Today's unseen, or probably unseen, poetry offering has a very fixed or regular rhyme scheme. And I reckon we can comment not only on its effect in this poem, but maybe we can throw together a general rule of thumb for regular rhyme schemes. And perhaps for their polar opposite, free verse, you know, where there's no rules of rhyme or beats per line holding sway. You know, line length appears a lot more random in free verse poems. And in a few moments, we're going to take a look at the little fella. Then we can analyse it in response to the exam question, of course, and then with my own fair hand, I'll craft a few paragraphs so wonderful they'll make your soul fizz with delight. And here's the poem, The Lake Isle of Inishfree by William Butler Yeats. Spelt Yeats, pronounced Yates. Irish poet, and he's writing about an island off the coast of Sligo in Ireland. And I'll follow my usual mode of operation. I'll read it through, analyse it, and then, as I say, knock out a few paragraphs. So, the Lake Isle of Inishfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Inishfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening's full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear the lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core. Right, so then, let's start thinking about this poem. The first thing in this poem I want to talk about is... Stop! Mr. Taylor, you clown, we've been here before. Before you start analysing this poem, we need to think what the exam question is, because it's that we're going to be responding to. The exam question is going to determine what we're looking for in the poem. We're not just analysing this poem willy-nilly. Okay then, here is the question, complete with highlighted keywords. What do you think are the speaker's feelings about city life and rural life, the island? And how does the poet present these feelings to the reader? Oftentimes you'll get the question shaped like this, where the first bit is looking at what the theme is, and the second part after and thinking about how, what language techniques, what methods, what structural techniques are used to present that theme. So, speaker's feelings about city life and rural life, that's our focal point when we respond to this question, and how means what techniques, what poetic techniques is the writer using to present those feelings. So with that question and its keywords ringing in our ears, we can now start to analyse this poem. Here's some of the things that I've locked onto. Of course, this is by no means an exhaustive list of the techniques that are in there to address this theme. I'm sure some egghead at a university has written a thesis thousands of pages long on this poem. You've got half an hour, you're aiming for quality, not quantity. We've got the AB rhyme scheme. That seems to be fixed throughout this poem. We'll comment on that in a minute. We've also got the idea of peace dropping from the veils of morning. A nice metaphor we can also analyse later. Midnight's all a glimmer, noon's a purple glow. These are nice metaphors too. And at the end we've got that imagery, the pavement's grey and deep heart's core is also a metaphor. Right now we've probably collected our D grade or our E grade. We've identified these techniques and that's great. Next step, as you well know, is to analyse these techniques. What is the right trying to say or do or show? What are the effects on the reader? Now we've got peace dropping from the veils of the morning. Nice metaphor that. Veils are thin bits of gauze, very fine thin fabric, and to me that kind of captures a sense of fogs or mists in the morning. It's a very romantic view, and the idea that this peace settles on those mists. It's a very peaceful, calming image that. You've got the light imagery of midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow. A glow as maybe connotations of warmth and safety. So that's presenting this island as being some sort of protection, support, safety net for him. We've got pavements grey. Pavements tend to be made out of concrete, so that explains that. And deep heart's core. Now I'm going to save my analysis of the rhyme scheme for the next slide. But we can say, I guess, box ticked, we've analysed language here. However, I know a lot of you students are really hungry, and that does generally warm my heart, you're really hungry to achieve those A stars. And I think to get the A star, we need to be evaluating language. So we need to dip back into those bits that we've highlighted, see if we can't winkle out either another interpretation or another poetic technique. So we've got the peace dropping from the veils of the morning. We've already said veils captures the idea of the mists, but I think veils also has a connotation of marriage, you know, a bride's veil. Perhaps that's suggesting that there's something kind of sacred and special about the mornings on the island. We've got the purple glow and the glimmer. Glimmer, I guess, has a connotation of jewels. Perhaps this emphasises how precious the island is to him. Pavement's grey, I think there's a beautiful opportunity to evaluate language here because it's an ambiguous meaning, pavement's grey. It could refer to the colour, but it could also symbolise mood. So the city is being linked here with dull colours, which suggests that it's a very sterile, spiritually sapping place, in contrast to the vitality of the island. Now that we've analysed language, let's lock on to this structural feature of rhyme scheme. Now there's a famous poet from a long time ago called John Milton, and he talked about the bondage of rhyming, which is nothing fruity. It simply means the idea that rhyme seems to kind of constrain or tamp down or contain language. So it can have a connotation of entrapment about it. In this poem, with this very fixed rhyme scheme, one thing we could infer, perhaps, is that because rhyme has this connotation of a bondage of rhyme, perhaps that reflects the fact that the narrator feels trapped in his city life. This island dream will remain precisely that, a dream. He cannot break out of his urban nightmare. Now, frankly, I think if you toss that at an examiner, his jaw's going to be hanging off his hinges. He's going to be in awe to your A-star skill. However, I think we can still evaluate this rhyme scheme as well. We've just given a sublime analysis of it. Let's see if we can pull out a secondary interpretation. Because it's a fixed rhyme scheme, there's something mellow, predictable, reassuring about it. Perhaps that might reflect the comfort and reassurance and security that he feels on the island. So you can see what I've done there. I've pulled out two interpretations for that fixed rhyme scheme. Here's a brief summary of my feral jabber of the last few minutes, just summarising the techniques that we found and the effects that they have. So, once we've had another goggle at the exam question, we'll cobble together a model paragraph or two. You know how I work. I highlight certain words in bold just so you can see what I've done to produce and craft and shape that A-star response. And here it is. I'll read it first, then I'll analyse it. Yeats uses metaphor to present the start of the day in Inishfree. He speaks of peace dropping from the veils of morning. The noun veils suggests the morning shrouded in mist or fog. Furthermore, veils has connotations of marriage, the bride's veil. This implies that there is something sacred and special about the island at this early hour. I've used metaphor, that's responding to the question, how does Yeats present his ideas? I've said the language technique of metaphor. I've also used the word present, another key word. I've embedded my evidence, dropping from the veils of morning has been kind of woven into my own sentence, and then I've locked in the explanation, I've locked in on the word veils. I could have said the word veils, but a veil is a thing. Far spiffier, I think, to call it a noun. The noun veils suggests a nice way to launch into our explanations, a morning shrouded in mist or fog. Furthermore, that connective, that highlights to the examiner, almost like me saying, yoo-hoo, telling the examiner, I'm going deeper into my analysis, I'm going for some evaluation. Veils has connotations of marriage. Connotations, very high level word, we all know it means associations, like the connotations of red are blood and lust and danger. Veils has connotations of marriage, the bride's veil. Implies, another great way to launch that secondary interpretation, implies there's something sacred and special about the island. With this second paragraph, I'm just going to read it. If you wish, you can take the time to consider what it is that makes this such an A-star contender. The ambiguity of line 11 reveals the narrator's feelings about the city. The switch to an urban setting here sees him on the pavements grey. On the one hand, this reflects the dull colour that he sees as characterising the city. Made of concrete, the city feels less bright than the island's glimmer and purple glow. Alternatively, the word grey can be read metaphorically. This emphasises Yeats wishes the reader to see how boring and sterile the city is compared to Inishfree. Now, as promised, I'm not going to analyse this, but with both of those paragraphs, I'd really like you to think about how I'm answering the question about the narrator's or the speaker's feelings about city life and rural life. I think it is explicit in both those paragraphs. Here's my third paragraph, if you've a mind to read this one focusing on the rhyme scheme. I've intentionally not included the term bondage of rhyme. It's another thing for you to worry about in the exam room. You've got enough to worry about. So I've tried to frame my response without throwing in that term from Milton. Oh, I've just realised, and you're going to have to forgive a senile old man here, I've just realised I did promise to say something about free verse, which is like the polar opposite, the antithesis of a fixed rhyme scheme. Free verse, there's no rhyme, there's no regular number of beats per line. And this is a great poetic form for presenting chaotic characters, real wackaloons. If you ever get a poem about a really damaged, psychologically damaged person, oftentimes it'll be written in that free verse to convey the chaos that burbles away in their grey matter. Free verse then, in generic terms, conveys a sense of chaos. Time allowing, I might try and squeeze out another paragraph, really locking in on that light imagery about the glow and the glimmer. But as I've said, I think I've done 3 points in eye-watering detail there. There's a real smell of evaluation about them. I believe that is sufficient. Introduction and conclusion. One word, optional. You've got 30 minutes. I'd rather you spent your time crafting that intelligent response rather than worrying about how you're going to bookend that response with a line or two. If time allows, by all means put in that 1 or 2 line introduction and conclusion that answer the question in a very general way. You can see my examples here. The conclusion, I've cited the poetic techniques that I've analysed. Plus, I've name-checked a couple of the key words from the question. To conclude then, how do we maximise our chances of securing the highest grades in the unseen poetry question? Well, read the question first. Identify that key theme that you'll be expected to dig out and explore in your response. It never hurts to kind of work out what the poem is about on a basic level. In this case, Yeats was talking about the peace and joy that he'll derive from the island, which he clearly doesn't get in the city. You'll also be wanting to identify those language and structural techniques, analysing their effects, the effects on the reader, and, where possible, evaluating them too. Remember, this is not a case of, here's a poem, pull it apart. It's not like stripping down a car engine. You're looking at a particular idea or theme. And you're also looking at the language and structural techniques that present that or put that forward to the reader. Oh yeah, and make sure that your quotations aren't too long for your evidence either. And we're a kick up the bum off done, folks. Remember, fixed rhyme scheme then can reflect the theme of being constrained or trapped. Alternatively, free verse can convey a sense of disorder or chaos. It only remains for me to wish you the very best of luck when you're hunkering down in that exam hall. Go get them.